In the fading light of an autumn afternoon, Elias wandered the cobbled paths of the old botanical garden, where the air hung heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and distant rain. At 64, his steps had grown deliberate, each one a quiet negotiation with the earth, as if he feared disturbing the fragile veil between memory and the present. His coat, worn thin at the elbows, whispered against the wind, and in his pocket, he carried a small notebook, its pages filled with fragments of verse that no one would ever read. The garden was his sanctuary, a place where time unraveled like the vines climbing the iron trellises. He came here not for the flowers, though they bloomed in defiant bursts of color, but for her, Lydia, the widow who tended the herb beds with hands as graceful as the stems she pruned. She was younger by a decade, her hair a silver cascade that caught the sun like frost on spiderwebs, her eyes deep pools of unspoken sorrows. They had met years ago, in the haze of a community lecture on poetry, where her laughter had rung out like a forgotten melody, piercing the monotony of his solitary evenings. Elias had loved her from afar, a love that bloomed quietly in the chambers of his heart, unbidden and unreturned. It was not the fiery passion of youth, that reckless blaze that consumes and rebuilds. No, this was a gentler flame, a candle flickering in the draught of twilight, casting long shadows on the walls of his soul. He watched her now from the bench beneath the ancient oak, its branches a canopy of gold and crimson, shedding leaves like tears for the dying season. Lydia knelt among the rosemary and thyme, her fingers coaxing life from the soil, oblivious to the man whose gaze lingered like mist on the morning grass. In the quiet hours of his apartment, surrounded by bookshelves sagging under the weight of forgotten dreams, Elias would trace the contours of this affection in his mind. He had been married once, to a woman whose love had been steady as the tide, but she had slipped away in the grip of illness, leaving him adrift in a sea of empty rooms. That was 20 years past, and since then, he had navigated life with the caution of a sailor charting unknown waters, his heart a compass rusted by disuse. Lydia's presence had awakened something dormant, a subtle ache that bloomed in the silence between heartbeats. He recalled their conversations, brief, ephemeral exchanges over cups of tea in the garden's tea room. "The herbs speak to me," she had said once, her voice a soft murmur that resonated in his chest like the hum of bees. "They remind me that growth comes from what we bury." Elias had nodded, his words caught in the web of his unspoken longing, replying only with a poem he recited from memory. And in the earth, the seeds dream of sky/unseen, they yearn for light's embrace. She had smiled then, a fleeting curve of lips that illuminated her face, but her eyes held the distance of stars, beautiful, yet forever out of reach. Was it love, this quiet obsession? Or merely the echo of loneliness, amplified by the creak of aging bones and the relentless tick of the clock on his mantle? Elias pondered this as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of bruised plum and amber. He imagined confessing, the words spilling forth like autumn rain, but the thought dissolved into vapor. What right had he to disrupt her world, a world rebuilt from the ruins of her own loss? Her husband had been gone only 5 years, and she wore her grief like a shawl, wrapped tightly around her shoulders. To intrude would be to shatter the delicate frost patterns on a windowpane. Yet, in the poetry of his thoughts, he wove fantasies. He pictured walks along the river, her hand brushing his by accident, the warmth seeping through like sunlight through clouds. He dreamed of reading to her from his notebook, verses born of this very yearning. "In the garden of unspoken words, I plant my hopes in shadowed rows, watered by glances, fed by sighs, blooming in the soil of what could be, but dreams they remained, fragile as pressed flowers between pages, yellowed and brittle with time." One evening, as dusk enveloped the garden in a cloak of indigo, Elias gathered his courage like scattered leaves. He approached her, the notebook clutched in his trembling hand. "Lydia," he began, his voice a whisper carried on the wind. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the last glimmers of day, and for a moment, he saw the universe in their depths, vast, unknowable. "I've written something. Inspired by this place, by the way you tend it." She took the notebook gently, her fingers grazing his, a touch that sent ripples through the still pond of his composure. As she read, her expression softened, a quiet appreciation blooming on her face. "It's beautiful, Elias," she said, handing it back. "You have a gift for capturing the essence of things unseen." But there was no spark, no reciprocal flame. Only the polite warmth of friendship, a hearth fire banked low against the cold. He nodded, swallowing the lump of unspoken truth, and turned away, the weight of unrequited affection settling deeper into his bones. As he walked home through the gathering night, the street lamps flickered to life like distant lighthouses, guiding him through the fog of his emotions. The city whispered around him, cars humming like distant thunder, leaves rustling in conspiracy, but inside a profound silence reigned. In the years that followed, Elias continued his vigils in the garden, his love transforming into something purer, more ethereal. It became a meditation on the human heart's capacity for quiet endurance, a poem etched in the lines of his face. He understood now that some loves are meant to remain shadows, dancing on the periphery of light, enriching the soul without ever being grasped. And in that understanding, there was a bittersweet beauty, like the final sigh of wind through bare branches, heralding the promise of spring's distant return. For Elias, the unrequited was not a wound, but a wellspring, a deep, introspective reservoir from which he drew the poetry of his remaining days. In the hush of evening, as stars pricked the velvet sky, he would sit by his window, gazing at the moon's indifferent glow, and whisper to the empty room. Love in its silence echoes eternally. The seasons turned, as seasons do, and Elias found himself tethered to the rhythm of the botanical garden, its cycles a mirror to his own quiet persistence. Winter arrived, cloaking the paths in frost, the herb beds now barren save for the stubborn sprigs of rosemary that Lydia had coaxed through the cold. Elias watched her from his bench, bundled in a scarf knitted by hands long gone, his breath a fleeting cloud in the crisp air. The garden was quieter now, the silence amplifying the crunch of his boots on frozen gravel, the distant call of a crow like a note in a minor key. His love for Lydia had settled into a deeper groove, less a yearning than a state of being, like the steady drip of a faucet in an empty house. It was no longer about possession or confession. It was about presence, about bearing witness to her existence as one might marvel at a painting, its beauty undiminished by the glass that separates viewer from canvas. He wrote of her still, his notebook a tapestry of half-formed stanzas, each one a brushstroke capturing the curve of her wrist as she worked, the way her laughter broke like sunlight through a storm. One February morning, when the air stung with the promise of snow, Elias arrived to find Lydia absent. The herb beds lay untouched, their edges blurred by a dusting of frost. His heart, that fragile instrument, stuttered. He inquired at the tea room, where the girl behind the counter, young enough to be his granddaughter, offered a sympathetic frown. "Lydia's taken ill," she said. "Nothing serious, they say, but she'll be resting for a while." Elias nodded, his throat tight, and left without his usual tea, the warmth of the room suddenly oppressive. The days that followed were a study in absence. The garden felt hollow without her, its colors muted, its air heavier. Elias walked the paths alone, his thoughts spiraling inward like the rings of a felled tree. He wondered if she was warm enough, if someone brought her soup, if she missed the scent of earth as much as he missed her silhouette against the winter sky. He wrote, "In the quiet of your absence, / the garden holds its breath, / an eye, a sentinel of frost, / guard the echo of your name." But the words felt inadequate, like trying to capture a snowflake in a net. He considered visiting her, imagined knocking on her door with a bundle of dried lavender from the garden's gift shop, a gesture as small and fragile as his hopes. But fear held him back, fear of overstepping, of seeing pity in her eyes, of shattering the delicate balance of their acquaintance. Instead, he sent a card, a simple thing with a pressed violet on the cover, and a note in his careful script, * wishing you warmth and swift recovery. The garden waits for you. Elias. * He mailed it with the trepidation of a boy sending his first love letter, though he was decades past such innocence. Weeks later, spring stirred, tentative and green, and Lydia returned. Elias saw her before she saw him, her frame slighter than he remembered, her movements slower, as if she carried the weight of winter in her bones. He approached, his heart a drumbeat against his ribs, and offered a smile that felt too bright for the moment. "You're back," he said, the words plain but heavy with relief. She smiled, that familiar curve of lips that never quite reached her eyes. "The herbs were calling," she said, her voice softer now, threaded with weariness. They spoke of small things, the thaw, the first crocuses, the way the light lingered longer each day. Elias wanted to ask about her illness, to offer some fragment of comfort, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he handed her a new poem, scrawled on a scrap of paper. "The earth wakes slowly, as do we, slash its roots entwined with silent vows." She read it in the dappled shade, her fingers tracing the lines, and for a moment, Elias thought he saw a flicker in her gaze. Something like recognition, or perhaps gratitude. "You see the world so clearly, Elias," she said, folding the paper into her pocket. "It's a gift." But there was no invitation in her tone, no bridge to cross the chasm between them. She turned back to her work, and he to his bench, the distance between them as immutable as ever. As spring bloomed into summer, Elias began to understand the shape of his love. It was not a fire to be kindled or a story to be resolved. It was a river flowing steadily through the landscape of his days, carving valleys in his heart. He no longer dreamed of her hand in his, but of her happiness wherever it might root. He wrote less of longing and more of acceptance, his verses turning to the garden itself. "In the soil of unspoken dreams, love grows wild, untamed by touch, its petals fall, its seeds take wing." One evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of gold, Lydia approached his bench, a rare reversal of their roles. She held a small pot of mint, its leaves fragrant and vivid. "For you," she said, placing it in his hands. "It's hardy. It'll thrive, even if you forget to water it." Her smile was warm, unguarded, and for a moment, Elias felt the world pause, as if the stars themselves held their breath. He carried the mint home, its scent filling his apartment, a quiet companion to his solitary nights. He placed it on his windowsill, where it caught the morning light, and each day he tended it with a care he could not offer Lydia herself. In its stubborn growth, he found a kind of peace, a testament to love that asks nothing in return. A love that, like the garden, endures through frost and bloom, silent but ever-present, a poem written in the language of living things. Autumn returned, a familiar visitor with its palette of amber and rust, and Elias felt the cycle closing like the pages of a well-loved book. The botanical garden shed its summer vibrancy, the flowers retreating into memory, leaving behind a tapestry of fallen petals that crunched underfoot like whispered regrets. At 65 now, Elias moved with a touch more hesitation, his joints echoing the creak of the garden gates, but his visits remained steadfast, a ritual etched into the calendar of his heart. The mint from Lydia thrived on his windowsill, its leaves a verdant testament to resilience, releasing a sharp, invigorating scent each time he brushed against it. It had become a talisman, a bridge between his solitary world and the garden's communal breath. He tended it with quiet devotion, watering it in the soft light of dawn, murmuring fragments of verse as if the plant could absorb his unspoken affections. Green sentinel of distant grace, you flourish where words fail to root. Lydia, too, had changed subtly with the seasons. Her steps were more measured, her smiles carrying the faint imprint of introspection, as if her illness had left behind a shadow that lingered in the corners of her eyes. They exchanged greetings like old acquaintances, polite, layered with the warmth of shared history, but Elias sensed a new fragility in her, a porcelain quality that made him ache with unspoken concern. He watched her prune the fading roses, her hands deft despite the tremble he imagined there, and wondered at the stories buried in her silence. One crisp afternoon, as leaves swirled in eddies around their feet, Lydia joined him on the bench uninvited, a departure from their usual choreography. The air was laced with the earthy tang of impending rain, and the sky hung low, pregnant with clouds. She sat with a sigh, her hands folded in her lap like folded letters, and for a long moment, they shared the quiet, the only sound the rustle of wind through the oaks. "I've been thinking about your poems," she said finally, her voice threading through the breeze like smoke. "They speak of things I haven't dared to name." Elias turned to her, his heart a sudden flutter, like a bird trapped in his chest. He searched her face for clues, finding lines etched by time and loss, eyes that held the depth of autumn ponds. "What things?" he asked, his words barely above a whisper, afraid to shatter the moment. She gazed at the horizon, where the sun pierced the clouds in golden shafts. "Loneliness, perhaps. The way it wraps around you, familiar as an old coat. And love. The kind that doesn't demand but simply is." Her fingers twisted the hem of her scarf, a nervous gesture that humanized her, pulling her from the pedestal of his adoration. "Since my husband passed, I've built walls, Elias. High ones to keep the world at bay. But your words, they slipped through the cracks." The confession hung between them, delicate as a spider's thread, and Elias felt a warmth bloom in his chest, not the fire of reciprocation, but the gentle glow of connection. He wanted to reach out to bridge the inches that separated their hands, but restraint held him fast. Instead, he offered a poem recited from memory, his voice steady despite the tremor within. "In the autumn of our days, we gather leaves of what might have been, press them between the pages of our souls, and find beauty in their quiet decay." Lydia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time, she placed her hand on his arm, a touch light as falling leaves, yet heavy with meaning. "Thank you," she murmured, rising to leave, her silhouette retreating into the gathering dusk. Elias remained, the imprint of her hand lingering like a phantom warmth, stirring the embers of his long-held affection. That night, in the hush of his apartment, with immense fragrance mingling with the scent of rain through an open window, Elias wrote feverishly. His verses flowed like a river unleashed, a touch ephemeral as mist awakens rivers long thought dry, and in its wake, the heart remembers the poetry of possibility. He no longer yearned for more. This subtle shift, this crack in the wall, was enough to illuminate the chambers of his solitude. As winter approached once more, their encounters deepened. Conversations that meandered like garden paths, touching on books, on dreams deferred, on the quiet joys of watching seasons turn. Lydia shared fragments of her past, the laughter of her marriage, the void of its end, the slow rebuilding of self. Elias listened, his love transforming into a supportive silence, a mirror reflecting her strength back to her. He understood now that unrequited love was not a static ache, but a living entity, evolving with time's gentle hand. It had led him here, to this bench of shared confidences, where affection bloomed not in grand declarations, but in the subtle interplay of glances and words. In the garden's eternal cycle, Elias found his own renewal, a heart that, though scarred by silence, beat with the rhythm of enduring grace. And so, as snow began to dust the paths like forgotten promises, Elias whispered to the wind, "Love, in its patience, reveals the stars hidden behind the veil of day." Winter tightened its grip on the botanical garden, transforming it into a crystalline cathedral where every branch glittered with frost and the air carried the sharp bite of cold. Elias, now a fixture as enduring as the oak under which he sat, wrapped his scarf tighter, his breath a ghostly plume in the morning chill. At 65, he felt the weight of time in his bones, yet his heart remained tethered to this place, to the rhythm of Lydia's presence, which had become as vital to him as the seasons themselves. The mint on his windowsill had grown wild, spilling over the pot's edges like an unruly thought, and he tended it with a reverence that bordered on prayer. It was a living link to Lydia, a quiet reminder of her gift, her fleeting touch, the words they'd exchanged under autumn's fading light. He no longer wrote of longing alone. His notebook now held verses of gratitude, of moments preserved like frost on a leaf. In winter's hush, the heart learned to cherish warmth in fleeting sparks, a hand's touch, a shared silence, enough to light the darkest dawn. Lydia returned to the garden sporadically that winter, her visits dictated by the whims of her health. Elias learned through the tea room's whispers that her illness lingered, a shadow that ebbed and flowed, stealing her strength but not her resolve. When she appeared, her face was paler, her silver hair tucked beneath a woolen cap, yet her hands still moved with purpose among the evergreen herbs, coaxing life from frozen soil. He watched her from afar, his love now a quiet guardianship, a wish for her to find peace in the earth she so loved. One January afternoon, when the sky was a seamless gray and snowflakes danced like errant thoughts, Lydia approached his bench again, her steps slow but deliberate. She carried a small bundle wrapped in burlap, her breath catching as she settled beside him. "For you," she said, unwrapping a cluster of dried lavender. It sent a faint echo of summer, to keep the winter at bay. Her smile was fragile, a crescent moon in a clouded sky, and Elias felt his chest tighten with a tenderness too vast for words. He took the lavender, his fingers brushing hers, and for a moment time folded in on itself, her nearness a warmth that defied the cold. "You're too kind," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. He wanted to say more, to confess the depth of what she'd come to mean, but the words dissolved, as they always did, into the silence of his restraint. Instead, he offered a poem, scribbled that morning in anticipation of her return. "In the frost of winter's rain, your presence is a spark, a bloom preserved in ice, a heart's quiet vow to endure." She read it slowly, her eyes tracing the lines as if they held a map to some hidden truth. "You make the world feel softer, Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like it's safe to feel again." The words hung between them, delicate as snowflakes, and for the first time, Elias saw not just the widow, not just the gardener, but the woman beneath, a soul navigating her own quiet battles, reaching out in her own way. They sat together longer that day, the snow falling in gentle curtains, cloaking the garden in a hush that felt sacred. Lydia spoke of her childhood, of winters spent skating on frozen ponds, of her husband's laughter echoing across the ice. Elias listened, his own memories stirring, nights with his wife reading by the fire, her hand steady in his. The past and present wove together, a tapestry of shared humanity, and though their stories were separate, their telling felt like a bridge, fragile but real. As spring whispered its approach, Elias noticed a change in their encounters. Lydia sought him out more often, her presence less fleeting, her words less guarded. They spoke of poetry, of the earth's resilience, of the way grief and joy could coexist like roots and blossoms. One morning, as the first buds pierced the soil, she handed him a book, a worn collection of Rilke's poems, its pages marked with her notes. "Read this," she said. "It feels like you." That night, Elias pored over the book, his fingers tracing her annotations, each one a glimpse into her mind. He found a line she'd underlined. "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once," with beauty and courage beside it, in her neat script she'd written. For Elias, who sees, his heart stuttered, not with hope of romance, but with the profound realization that he was seen in return, not as a shadow, but as a man, flawed and whole. Their friendship deepened, a quiet current beneath the garden's surface. Elias no longer dreamed of confessions. The love he carried had transformed into something broader, a reverence for her existence, for the moments they shared. He wrote, "Love in its winter bloom, needs no claim, no crown, it is the light in another's eyes, the warmth of a hand extended." One spring evening, as the garden glowed with the tender green of renewal, Lydia sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "Elias," she said, her voice steady, "I'm glad you're here." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of years of unspoken understanding. He smiled, his eyes tracing the horizon where the sun lingered, painting the world in hues of hope. And so, in the garden's eternal turning, Elias found his peace, a love that asked nothing yet gave everything. It was enough to sit beside her, to share the silence, to let the seasons carry them forward. In his notebook, he wrote one final verse. "In the garden of quiet loves, we plant no seeds, yet all things grow, rooted in the grace of simply being." Summer unfolded in the botanical garden like a well-worn page, its days long and languid, drenched in sunlight that filtered through the canopy in golden streams. Elias, embracing the warmth with a quiet gratitude, found his routine unchanged yet enriched by the subtle evolution of his bond with Lydia. At 65, he carried himself with a newfound lightness, as if the seasons had taught him to shed the heavier burdens of expectation, leaving only the essence of appreciation in their wake. The lavender she had given him now hung dried in his apartment, tied with a ribbon near the window, its faded purple a sentinel against the encroaching dusk. Beside it, the mint continued its exuberant sprawl, a living emblem of persistence amid the city's hum. Elias clipped its leaves for tea, the ritual a meditation that evoked her image, her hands in the soil, her voice weaving through the air like ivy. His notebook brimmed with verses that captured this shift. In summer's generous light, shadows shorten, hearts expand, revealing paths once hidden in the undergrowth. Lydia's presence in the garden grew more consistent as her health steadied, her work among the blooming perennials a testament to renewal. She moved with renewed vigor, her silver hair catching the sun like threads of light, her laughter occasionally breaking free, a sound that resonated in Elias's chest like the chime of distant bells. Their meetings on the bench had become a habit, unspoken yet anticipated, where words flowed with the ease of a summer stream. One sweltering afternoon, as bees droned lazily among the lavender beds, Lydia arrived with a basket of fresh-picked herbs, basil, thyme, and a sprig of rosemary. "For your tea," she said, settling beside him, her eyes sparkling with a mischief he hadn't seen before. The heat wrapped around them like a shared secret, and Elias felt a flush rise, not from the sun alone, but from the proximity of her, the way her scent mingled with the garden's bouquet. They spoke of dreams that day, the kind that visit in the haze between sleep and waking. Lydia confessed her longing to travel again, to see the wild gardens of distant lands, places where flowers bloomed untamed by human hands. "But perhaps it's enough to imagine," she said, her gaze distant, as if tracing maps in the clouds. Elias shared his own quiet aspiration, to compile his poems into a slim volume, not for publication, but as a legacy of sorts, a whisper left for the world. "I'd read it," she replied softly, her hand resting momentarily on his knee, a touch that sent ripples through the still waters of his composure. In that moment, Elias glimpsed the possibility of something more, not the consuming passion of youth, but a companionship born of mutual understanding, tender as new leaves. Yet he held back, his love a garden carefully tended, wary of overgrowth. He recited a verse instead, his voice blending with the rustle of leaves. "Beneath the sun's unwavering gaze, we unfold like petals at noon, revealing colors long concealed, in the quiet dance of shared afternoons." As the conversation waned, Lydia leaned back, her eyes closing against the light, and Elias allowed himself to study her. The fine lines of her face, etched like veins in a leaf, telling stories of resilience and quiet strength. He wondered if she felt the undercurrent between them, the subtle pull like roots intertwining beneath the soil. But he asked nothing, content in the ambiguity, for in it lay the poetry of possibility. That evening, as thunder rumbled on the horizon, promising relief from the day's heat, Elias wrote by lamplight, his words a cascade. Love in summer's embrace whispers of storms yet to come, nourishing the earth with gentle rain, in hearts with unspoken rainbows. The storm broke as he finished, rain pattering against the window like applause, washing the city clean. Through the height of summer, their friendship flourished, marked by small gestures, a shared umbrella during a sudden shower, a book exchanged with notes in the margins, a laugh that echoed longer than before. Elias no longer viewed his affection as unrequited. It had blossomed into a mutual regard, subtle and profound, a connection that needed no labels to validate its depth. As the days began to shorten, hinting at autumn's return, Elias sat in the garden alone one twilight, the air cooling around him. Lydia had left early that day, but her absence felt temporary, a pause rather than a void. He closed his eyes, breathing in the evening's hush, and murmured to the fading light, "In the cycle of sun and shadow, we find our place, intertwined yet free, slash a love that blooms in its own time. Autumn descended once more upon the botanical garden, a gentle reprise in the symphony of seasons, its leaves aflame in shades of ochre and scarlet, drifting like embers from a dying fire. Elias, now 66, felt the familiar pull of time's inexorable march. His steps along the cobbled paths a measured cadence, each one a quiet affirmation of continuity. The air carried the crisp tang of harvest, mingled with a faint, earthy promise of decay. And in this liminal space, his thoughts turned inward, weaving memories like vines through the trellis of his days. The herbs from Lydia's summer gift had infused his teas with their vibrant essence, a daily ritual that evoked her presence even in solitude. His apartment, once a bastion of quiet isolation, now held echoes of their shared moments. The book of Rilke on his shelf, its pages worn from rereading, the lavender sachet tucked in a drawer, releasing whispers of scent when opened. Elias's notebook overflowed with verses that captured this evolving tapestry. In autumn's golden hush, slash we harvest what we've sown in silence, slash fruits of patience, ripened by the sun's farewell. Lydia, too, seemed touched by the season's reflective mood. Her work among the fading blooms a dance of graceful resignation. She arrived earlier now, her silver hair catching the slanted light like frost on grass, her eyes holding a depth that spoke of winters weathered and springs reclaimed. Their bench had become a sanctuary, a place where words were not hurried but savored, like the last rays of sun before twilight. One overcast afternoon, as rain pattered softly on the canopy above, Lydia joined him with a thermos of herbal tea, steam rising like a shared breath in the cooling air. "I made this from the garden's yield," she said, pouring a cup for each, her hands steady despite the chill. The warmth seeped through the porcelain, mirroring the subtle heat that had grown between them, a companionship that bloomed without fanfare, rooted in the soil of mutual vulnerability. They spoke of impermanence that day, the way leaves clung before letting go, the cycles that mirrored the human heart. Lydia shared a memory of her husband planting bulbs in their final autumn together, his faith in unseen growth a lesson she carried still. "He taught me that endings are just preparations," she murmured, her gaze on the swirling leaves. Elias nodded, his own losses echoing hers, and ventured a confession of his own. The years spent adrift after his wife's passing, the poetry that had become his anchor. "Your words have been my light," she replied, her voice a soft current, and in her eyes he saw a reflection of his own quiet strength. As the rain intensified, they huddled closer under the oak's shelter, shoulders touching in a gesture as natural as the falling drops. Elias felt the boundary between them soften, not dissolving entirely, but yielding like damp earth underfoot. He recited a verse born of the moment, in the rain's gentle cadence, slash we wash away the dust of yesterdays, slash revealing roots entwined below, slash a quiet union forged in storm and calm. The conversation lingered into dusk, the garden emptying around them, leaving only the rustle of wind and the patter of rain. Lydia's laughter, rare and resonant, broke through when Elias shared a humorous anecdote from his youth, a failed attempt at gardening that ended in a bed of weeds. In that shared mirth, Elias glimpsed the fullness of connection, a love that had transcended its unrequited origins to become something woven into the fabric of their lives. That evening, as he walked home through the mist-shrouded streets, the thermos warm in his coat pocket, Elias pondered the beauty of this evolution. No grand declarations marked their path. Instead, it was built on the subtle architecture of glances, touches, and truths exchanged. His love, once a solitary flame, now cast a shared glow, illuminating the autumn of his years with unexpected grace. In the quiet of his room, with the rain a lullaby against the panes, he wrote, "Love in its autumn guise, slash drops pretense like falling leaves, slash revealing the bare branches of truth, slash and in their bareness, profound beauty."